Here's what should be a non-controversial statement. Police officers engaged in law enforcement activities who are faced with a violent attack should be able to respond in ways that are objectively reasonable and comply with the law. In other words, officers should be able to defend themselves with proper techniques when faced with resistance. Well, this past week, Interim Chief Sullivan of the Phoenix Police Department released a draft use of force policy for public comment. Well, I happen to be a member of the public and a resident of Phoenix, so this week's video will contain my thoughts on the policy. First, the policy deliberately states that it's prohibiting tactics and techniques that would otherwise be justified under Graham versus Connor and Arizona state law. Officers under the new policy can face termination in Phoenix for engaging in legally justified, objectively reasonable actions. To the best of my knowledge, this would make Phoenix the most dangerous jurisdiction in Arizona, where in 2022, there were a record number of over 250 murders. Phoenix would be the only jurisdiction in this state that has the policy completely divorced from Graham versus Connor. Now, for some other specific examples. The new policy says that any use of force must be reasonable, necessary, and proportional. This is a standard that doesn't exist in any cases that I've ever read, and is impossible to apply in practice. If a suspect charges at an officer with a knife with a 4-inch blade, can the officer only respond with a knife with a 4-inch blade? Is that proportional? If a suspect only shot a victim in the leg and is now pointing a gun at the police,
What's going on, Dave?
I have a gun.
Put it down.
Back up.
can officers use deadly force? Would that be proportional? Who decides what's proportional? As a reminder, the Supreme Court actually makes it clear that officers are legally justified when they're objectively reasonable, and that objective reasonableness is judged by the perspective of an officer at the time. Recognizing that attempting to apply 20/20 hindsight is impractical and unfair. But the new policy actually expects police officers to not only have perfect hindsight, they need to be all-knowing. The new policy states under duty to intervene that all employees shall intervene with no fear of retaliation when they know or should know another employee is using unreasonable force, or is otherwise engaged in abusive behavior or misconduct. Now, this could sound good in theory, but in practice, if a backup officer sees another officer in a fight for her life, and it turns out later that the force that she was using was, quote, unreasonable, end quote, under this new policy, that backup officer has a duty to intervene? This is nonsensical. Additionally, and this targets my law enforcement viewers, note carefully what tactics now will require use of force reports. Wrist locks. This is a common technique used to control a subject's hands before they're placed into handcuffs. Now, officers faced with suspects with known violence potential would be considered to have used force if they apply a wrist lock. These are just some of the more egregious parts of the policy. There are literally dozens of additional concerns that I see. A link to the proposed policy is in the description below. And here's possibly the most infuriating thing about the entire circumstance surrounding this new policy. It's the status of Phoenix's current policy. Phoenix's current response to resistance policy has never, ever been found by any court of law to be unconstitutional or to be inconsistent with state law. It's carefully written to comply with the law and to protect the health and safety of both officers and suspects. But this new policy proposal is downright dangerous. It creates a separation between what's lawful and what's prohibited by policy. If implemented, it will make Phoenix police officers' jobs more dangerous. It deliberately encourages hesitation, and while time and distance are often an officer's friend, there are a number of circumstances where hesitation can result in officers being seriously injured or killed.
Joe, I'm not. I'm finna shoot your ass. I'm finna shoot your ass. Don't drop the gun.
I honestly hope that officials in Phoenix take the time to consider the effects of implementing this new policy. My request would be to compare existing policy to the proposed changes, line by line, and only make changes that would make the police department more efficient, effective, and safe. I'm Steve Sterbalik. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.